So Jordan, maybe you can help set the stage for soil health in the North Central region, maybe soil types, variability, land use, key indicators, all that stuff.
Absolutely. Well, first off, thanks so much for this opportunity. It's really great to see everyone here talking about soil health. It's a thing that really matters a lot to me, and so I'm excited to talk about it. So, when I like to think about soil health, I like to take a step back and first ask ourselves kind of what are we asking of our soils before we can define health? And when I think about humans, right, we have a sprinter, we have someone like Flojo who held records for 30 years, and we have a marathon runner who, those are completely different outcomes. Or you have like an Arnold Schwarzenegger bodybuilder type, right? Those are all different pictures of health, but they all look very different. And so they're optimized for different outcomes. So I like to start there, kind of say, what are we trying to optimize for? So, for me, I often work in agricultural systems. And so we try and optimize for things like nutrient management and conservation, et cetera. And so, it's really hard to think about that across a heterogeneous landscape. Down here in Missouri, we have a lot of clay pan soils. In the South, we've got like ultisols, really weathered soils, and North Central goes all the way up through, Minnesota. And so it's a broad net, kind of stay away from specifically talking about indicators and like to think instead about what is capturing the processes, the soil health processes that we are trying to describe. I think that there's kind of inherent things and that there are quantitative approaches to capture those and be able to deliver actual actionable information. I stay away from management prescriptions though. I think farmers are really effective innovators, and I like to think about just and tell them if they're heading in the right direction.
And Lydia, let's bring you in here to maybe add on from a field crops perspective in Iowa, and specifically on sort of the profitability of soil health, which has been a theme of earlier conversations. Would love to hear your perspective on that.
Yeah, thanks, Tim, and thanks, Abby. So my context here, I work at a farmer-led nonprofit based in central Iowa, and I work with a bunch of field crop farmers. So Iowa, like the greater corn belt, as it's called, we grow a lot of corn and a lot of soybeans. It's not everything we grow in Iowa, but it's most of what we grow in Iowa. And so when we're talking to farmers about adding soil health practices, again, like Jordan was saying, it's not a one size fits all. We want to know their goals, we want to know their contexts, but we have done a lot of work with farmers on adding cover crops to the rotation, especially that, and reducing tillage as sort of the first steps, the gateway to some of these other soil health practices, like diversifying our rotation and adding perennials. And like it's been brought up before, we often get questions of, how are these practices going to pencil out? Cover crop, that is a seed cost. There is an application cost, no matter what your system is, for getting it into the ground. And so, what is, it's just a cover crop. It's not my cash crop. How am I really going to pencil this out? And so a couple ways that we've worked with farmers to sort of communicate how to recoup those costs and sort of the general profitability of that system. Again, we can reduce our reliance on off-farm inputs with cover crops by reducing herbicide passes. We can get livestock back on the land and grazing and saving hay costs. Those are two ways to really recoup the costs of cover crops in a short term. And then we're also working on sort of the long-term soil health and profitability. And I think the thing I want to emphasize there in the systems that I'm working in is, again, trying to increase our return on investment by having our soils function so that we don't have to have as much off-farm inputs. So reducing our nitrogen over time in corn because we're cycling more in our system, or we're growing cover crops that are fixing nitrogen in and of itself. So our organization does a lot of on-farm research that's farmer-led, and this year we have 20 farms across Iowa that are doing paired comparison trials, randomized replicated strips in their corn to reduce fertilizer, by about 50 pounds per acre when they've been using soil health practices, for 5 to 10 years. So trying to help empower them to be able to make those cuts and, increase their profitability and rely on their soils to do that functioning for them, but showing, seeing is believing sometimes. So sort of testing that out and helping them trial those sorts of practices, and then they can share that with other farmers and, hopefully spread the word that when we do these sorts of practices, it actually makes us more resilient and keeps money in our pockets in the long term.
Great. And Albert, can you elaborate too on, if we're reducing fertilizer inputs, we're trying to reduce costs, where do municipal waste products fit into this? And, we talked about biosolids earlier. How does that fit into the Northern Plains in relation to soil health, but then also water quality? I think we need to talk about water quality as well.
Thank you, everyone. Is that I really appreciate the opportunity to participate in this discussion. And as Sally did mention earlier, is that your waste could be someone else's treasure. And that's where biosolids comes in. Now, many people may not even know much about biosolids, but the thing about it is that every community produces biosolids. And it might represent as far as being able to use it on agricultural land. It's actually just a very small portion of agricultural land that you could have enough biosolids to land apply. But if we just consider that where biosolids is produced, it is going to be land applied just within the vicinity of where it is produced. So for those farms in the area, it is significant, but for like a state as a whole, it might not be very large. So like for us in Chicago, Chicago is like one of the largest biosolids producer, or our entity, the Metropolitan Water Reclamation District of Greater Chicago, is one of the largest biosolids management agency. So with this is that we have farmers in the community actually get a lot of benefits out of the continued land application. So that leads them to get greater profitability because for the most part, the biosolids comes to them at a very low cost. Now, with respect to our soil health, now we know that biosolids has a lot of organic matter, but not just organic matter, it actually provides the nutrients also. And the farmers get it, most times it's just for the nutrients, but organic matter buildup is actually one of the significant benefit. The one thing that is actually very unique about biosolids as a source of organic matter to the soil is that biosolids also have what we call amorphous or reactive iron and aluminum, and that actually helps the organic carbon to be sustained in the soil. So like, let's say in the Midwest area, even though that we have our molly soils that are high in organic matter, over time and with cropping, we continue to lose that organic carbon. But with biosolids now, as we continue to apply it, and the iron helps to protect the mineralization or the degradation of the organic matter, with continuous application, we are getting more and more organic matter buildup. So more and more improvements in soil health. And we see soil health in terms of not just the organic carbon, but in terms of the nutrient cycling, that is the amount of nitrogen that is being recycled. Now, with respect to water quality, just consider this, that in the Midwest especially, and for those states that are part of the Mississippi River Basin, improvements that you can have on your agricultural land that helps to improve nutrient use efficiency and keep nutrients on the land, reduces the amount of runoff, leaching. And in the Mississippi River Basin, the big issue is potential for like nitrogen and phosphorus getting into the Mississippi River and down to the Gulf of Mexico, where it is creating the hypoxic zone. So biosolids or any sort of management practices that keep nutrients on the land actually helps to protect water quality, not only locally, but also downstate, like in the Gulf of Mexico. And for us is that we actually do have a lot of research being done here on land that the Metropolitan Water Reclamation District of Greater Chicago owns. And that is from, just consider this, 4,000 acres of strip mine land over the past 40 years, because of biosolids application, it has been moved from barren land to highly productive agricultural land, because the biosolids will help to improve the quality in terms of soil health. So biosolids, it might be a small fraction as compared to the amount of amendments that we might want for, like, let's say, all the agricultural land. But in the areas where it is produced, it has a significant factor in terms of the cost of production, and also bringing benefits to the local community, because it is a more cost-effective approach to managing biosolids, which we all have to continue to produce anyway. So that's it as far as where biosolid fits in.
Yeah, and Albert, if I could ask a follow-up question to you, one thing we hear from farmers that have tried to utilize biosolids is that sometimes the quality and the fact that there's no foreign material in there and the consistency cannot be there sometimes. It can be inconsistent. Is that the biggest barrier to utilizing more biosolids for soil health, or are there other barriers out there that are causing it to not catch on more widespread?
So I think that generally we are doing quite well as far as how much of our biosolids gets on land, because as Sally mentioned, we typically we have between 50 to 70% of the biosolids that is produced in the US, and even also in this North Central region being land applied. But one thing that actually kind of limits us having to get more out there is that it is the cost of getting it from the local area to the agricultural farms. So let's say, for example, in Chicago here is that our contractors would not want to go out more than, like, let's say 50 to 60 miles, because that is a significant hauling cost. Then another thing is that as far as getting it more acceptable, and more acceptable will actually mean that farmers might even be willing to pay for it. But because of that, there is some public nuisance, and most times it is odors, the potential for odors in areas where it is applied. And of course, that there is some limitation on acceptance, mostly related to the potential of contaminants in the biosolids. But of course, that there is a lot of research and work by the US EPA that have actually helped to take things into perspective and establish regulations to ensure that biosolids are actually safely applied to land.
Great. Well, while we're on this topic of barriers to adoption of practices or use of specific materials, Lydia, do you have some thoughts on that as to how we can be mindful of those barriers as we move forward in the adoption of soil health practices?
Yeah, I think the most important thing that we think about as an organization is meeting farmers where they're at. We talked about soil health as a journey at the top of the hour. And so, meeting the farmer where they're at in that journey before they begin that journey, and sort of working with them to figure out how to help them move along and actually adopt some of these practices. What's their goals? What's their context? Who can we connect them to that is a knowledgeable person? I think there are cultural barriers, like change is hard for anyone. And so it's going to be really hard for a farmer also too, if there's no one in their region doing it. Sometimes farmers don't all want to be the talk of the coffee shop every week. So again, trying to connect them with others and build that community of practice so that they're supported, even if they're sort of doing something different that no one else is doing in their area. And then I think the last thing to be mindful of is it's not always just the farmer's decision. There's a lot of other people in the ag space that we're trying to work with that also are trusted advisors to farmers. We do educational programming for certified crop advisors to help educate them and empower them to feel more confident with talking about cover crops with their customers. We want to do more work with lenders who are talking to farmers and might, if they're not aware of the fact that, cover crops can help them be more profitable over time, they might discourage, the farmer that they're working with to use those. And same thing with insurance agents. So, it's about sort of getting everyone aligned, not just the farmer, and trying to break down those barriers for everyone. I think that's what we're working towards, and I think that's what's good for everyone to be mindful of.
Well, we're already down to the wire again, so we're going to give each of our panelists one more chance to share some closing thoughts or just anything that was kind of left unsaid so far. Albert, we'll start with you. Anything just to close out today's panel? It's been so fantastic.
Okay, thank you. Yeah. So the one thing is that when we have the question of biosolids, and normally there is that ick factor that people starts with in their mind. The one thing that we have to realize is that over the past, 50 years plus, we've been land applying biosolids as a fertilizer, as a soil amendment. And it continues to show that the benefits outweighs the risk. And we continue to actually do work on that. There is actually a lot of work being done at Colorado State University showing how the biosolids applied to dryland wheat, how it actually helps to improve soil health. Even for us in Chicago here is that we do a lot of work at our land application site, and we're actually able to show that not just improving soil health, but consider also the benefits that we get from carbon sequestration instead of taking that biosolids and sending it to landfill, where it actually really increases the amount of carbon dioxide emissions. So biosolids actually does have its place as a land application, as a sustainable practice for not just soil health, but also for addressing climate change.
Thank you so much, Albert. Really appreciate that. Unfortunately, we lost connection with Jordan. So, Lydia, the pressure's on you to really take us home, land the plane here on today's panel.
Whew, okay, lots of pressure here. Yeah, I guess I just want to emphasize the importance of context, and again, meeting farmers where they're at and doing a lot of that farmer to farmer education to take all the great work that you all are doing as researchers and at universities and get it on the ground and dispersed across the landscape. And I'll also just close that we do a lot of work here in Iowa with also trying to add back crops into diverse rotations. And so I think that, we talk a lot about cover crops, but I really think crop rotation is something that can help us achieve a lot of our soil health goals and benefits. And it's just making sure that we have the markets and the rest of the infrastructure to support those other crops.